Okay, hands and eyes, let's go ahead and take a look at the smartboard. Today we're going to be taking the guided notes over air pressure and how it's measured. Last class we talked about the properties of air. We investigated with that using our balloons, and we found out that air has mass. And so because air has mass, it also has other properties like density and pressure. And so today we're going to be talking about how the air pressure is measured. So open your books. We're going to be working out of the red weather books and off of page 12. So go ahead and do that now. Take your red weather books and we'll be working off of page 12. Okay, so you should have your red weather book turned to page 12, your guided notes out. On the page where it says how is air pressure measured. And that's on page 5 of your guided note packet. So how is that air pressure measured? Air pressure is measured with an instrument that's called a barometer. Okay, a barometer. And I actually have a barometer that I can show you this week, so that way you can pass it around and take a look at it. And we know that that's used to measure air pressure. And the type of barometer that I will show you is one of the most frequently used instruments, and it's called an aneroid barometer. And this barometer has an airtight metal chamber, which is sensitive to changes in air pressure. So when air pressure increases, the thin walls of the chamber are pushed in, and when the pressure drops, the walls will bulge out. So air pressure has a lot to do with the weather. So we're going to take a look at, if you're reading the weather on the Weather Channel website or any other weather website, what you could look for and what that tells you about the weather. So if you take a look here, we see it says pressure. So they're talking about air pressure. On this particular instance, it's 29.98 inches. That's inches of mercury. It was measured that way because before aneroid barometers, they used mercury barometers. And we've talked about how mercury isn't always as safe as they had thought it was originally. So we've gone away from using mercury instruments and use an alternate type of instrument like our aneroid barometer. But that's still one of the basic units that you can measure air pressure in is inches of mercury. You see this line that's right beside the reading for air pressure, and that line is telling you the trends for the air pressure. So if the line is straight, then the air pressure is holding constant. If that line is increasing, we know that the pressure is increasing. If that line is going down, then we know that the pressure is dropping. So what does it mean when your pressure is increasing or your air pressure is dropping? Well, if you take a look at our map, okay, we see big H's and big L's. And so what those big H's and big L's tell you on this weather map are how the pressure is in those particular areas. So the H stands for high pressure. So you can think of H as happy because usually that is associated with what you would consider to be good weather. Okay, so good weather means there's not a lot of humidity, so there's not a lot of water vapor in the air, that the clouds, they're just a few and they're nice and white and puffy, and usually there's sun that's out and shining. So what you would consider to be nice, happy weather. Okay, the L though, on the other hand, that stands for low pressure. And so when that pressure drops and you have low pressure, then that's kind of stands for lousy weather, weather that's not so great. It probably is very humid, and that means there's lots of water vapor in the air. That also means that there's going to be lots of clouds in the sky. It's not going to be sunny, and with those clouds, you'll probably have lots of precipitation. And so air pressure and whether it is rising or falling will really indicate to you what kind of weather you're going to have, whether it be happy with high pressure or lousy with low pressure. Okay, so let's go back to our notes and discuss how does altitude affect air pressure. So if you increase the altitude, if you go someplace where it's a little bit higher up on Earth, how does that affect your air pressure? Well, air pressure is greater at sea level and decreases as the altitude increases. Okay, so let's take a look at the stack of books that's on your desk. Okay, so you take a look at the stack. That bottom book at the very bottom of the stack, that's like being at sea level. And that very bottom book feels a lot of pressure from all the other books on top of it. So you can think about how air pressure is the weight of the air, and it makes a column all the way from sea level, so very far down, all the way up to and through the different layers of the atmosphere. So there's quite a bit more weight from the air on that particular area at sea level. But if you go up a little bit higher, let's say we're looking at the top book on that stack. Well, there's really nothing else on there. So there's a lot less pressure on that book than there is at the book at the bottom of the stack. So we know that as the altitude increases, the higher up you go on Earth, then your air pressure will then decrease. And then talking about the other property of air, density. How does altitude affect density? Well, as the altitude increases, the density of the air will decrease as well. The composition of the air is still the same, it's still made up of 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and you have a 1% of the other gases, but there are fewer oxygen molecules to breathe per cubic meter. So sometimes when you climb a mountain or you are staying at places with a lot higher elevation, then you might feel shortness of breath because you're really getting less oxygen molecules per breath than what you're used to wherever you live. So sometimes if you have, let's say, baseball players that go play the Colorado Rockies, and they're in their stadium, sometimes they get winded a little bit easier, or it's a little bit tougher for them to run because they're not getting the same amount of oxygen per breath that they're used to receiving. And it takes their bodies time to adjust to that. Okay, so this concludes our notes about air pressure. If you need to rewind any of this, feel free to do so. The next part is going to be talking about the atmosphere and its layers and how those are organized. Thank you for listening.